Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokemon trading card game, and you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, this week, we are talking all about US Nationals 2013. Now, ideally, I suppose we could have talked about this last week, but as I explained in somewhat, I would say, quite a bit of detail, last week was the anniversary show, and I was more interested in sharing stories and interviewing my girlfriend and various other people and talking about how I work with playing a Pokemon trading card game. So quite frankly, last week I had other things on my mind. This week, however, there is nothing else, so we are going to be talking all about US Nationals 2014. There are, however, a few things that I need to talk about first in the news, so let's get rolling with the news that the full set of scans from EX Battle Boost, this is the Japanese set coming out soon, they have been released. The full set of scans has been released, and with what we've already seen, it's fairly underwhelming. There is Chandelure and Excadrill EX, but of course we've already seen them. There are also reprints of Mewtwo EX from Next Destinies, Darkrai, White Kyurem, Caldeo, and Black Kyurem from Boundaries Crossed, Lugia and Victini EX from Plasma Storm. So reprints of all of those things. And that shouldn't surprise you, of course, because the majority of those EXs we've already had reprinted with different artwork, so it's only fair that Japan should now get them with said different artwork. Although actually they don't appear to be getting it with the different artwork. But then never mind. The point is, they're coming out. So, that's what we're getting. They're also getting a bunch of other cards. I mean, you can look on PokeBeach.com if you want to see the art for this, but basically they're getting a bunch of random reprints. Now, there's a few things I know which are moderately interesting. There is a reprint of the Double Draw Virizion. There is a reprint of Emboar from Black and White, of Reshiram, and I believe Zekrom from Black and White. There is a reprint of Gothitelle from Emerging Powers. But that's about it, to be honest. I mean, there's a few funky reprints in there, nothing that's going to set the world alight. The most interesting cards are Excadrill EX, Spiritomb, Gyarados, and Chandelure EX, which I've dealt with in the podcast in the last couple of weeks. Whether we'll get this set or not, I don't really know. Now, ideally, we wouldn't be getting this set at all, because we are going to be matching up with Japan's X and Y set when we get our next set in November. That's of course missing out Plasma Blast, but that's now not going to work entirely because of Spiritomb and these other cards which we should be getting, so I don't really know what's going to happen. I still think we're going to get the X and Y set at the same time as Japan. I'm not entirely sure when we're going to be getting all of these cards, and remember, of course, we're still missing Meloetta EX. Now this feeds in, actually, before we get to that, there are a couple of other very small bits of news. There's a tree Pokemon that's been announced. No one really cares about that, to be honest. The full set of Mewtwo vs Genesect deck scans are out, but there's really nothing in there to write home about. There's a Swoobat, which for 1 colourless energy allows you to flip a coin, and if heads, search your deck for 2 psychic energy and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you like. I mean, ignoring the fact that attaching psychic energy will usually be to a psychic Pokemon, and then it will be your opponent's turn, and they can try and use Deoxys EX to knock you out. Ignoring all of that, it's a coin flip on a stage 1, which means you'll be using this turn 2 at the earliest, and if you're flipping a coin to attach energy as an attack on your second turn of the game, you're probably not having a very good game. It's also been announced that similar to the Black and White kind of beginner sets or trainer kits, whatever you want to call them, designed especially kind of for kids, 1 boy set, 1 girl set, as well as that coming out for Black and White, we're getting an X and Y one. When I say we, I am of course referring only to Japan. These are cool, and you get play mats and sleeves and metal cases, etc. We're not getting them in this country. It's sad, but what can you do? And in the last little bit of news I want to talk about this week, well, except for the huge news, of course, it's being reported that Pokemon has slipped below Yu-Gi-Oh! In sales rankings, etc. We don't know exactly why this is, so it's not really news. I don't think this game's going to be going away anytime soon, so don't worry your pretty little heads about it. But in big news, next year's rotation has been announced, and it's been announced as Next Destinies On. Now, I couldn't possibly sit here and talk about the big implications of this in the news section, so what I'm going to do is I will be dedicating next week's edition of the podcast to this news about the rotation. There's no point trying to go into it today, it's just not going to be viable. What I am going to do is tell you that the sets we'll be losing are Black and White, Emerging Powers, and Noble Victories. And, some of the main cards we're going to be losing. Now, initially, we do seem to be losing Energy Switch. And if I'm not mistaken, we're also going to be losing Energy Search. However, these are cards which are always in the game, and a lot of people are suggesting that if we're going to be losing these cards, then it is very, very likely that they will be reprinted in Plasma Blast. Remember that Plasma Blast is our version of Megalo Cannon, as it was called in Japan. And, Megalo Cannon was a much smaller set than our Plasma Blast is going to be. I lied about Energy Search, by the way. It was, of course, reprinted in Boundaries Cross, so ignore that. But we are still going to be losing Energy Switch. We're also going to be missing things like Super Scoop Up and Crushing Hammer. Now, in terms of Pokemon, we're going to be losing Reshiram, Zekrom, Emboar from Black and White, as well as Gothitelle from Emerging Powers, but of course they are being reprinted in this EX Battle Boost set in Japan, so it might be that we get those reprints and it's all fine. We're also going to be missing things like the Virizion from Emerging Powers, the Noble Victories, Cobalion, Reuniclus, which was in Truth, Emerging Powers Tornadus, Kyurem and Vanillux from Noble Victories, the round deck Seismitoad. It never got too much play, although props to Tom Hall for winning a Battle Road with it some while ago, and various other things like Noble Victory Chandelure and that's been reprinted as a secret rare. Ignore that. So, we're not missing a huge amount. The other thing is, of course, that things like Pokemon Catcher and Max Potion have been reprinted as ultra rares, so they're not going to be going out the set. Neither is N, which was reprinted in Dark Explorers. And again, Terrakian's been reprinted as a secret rare. Now, what it will mean is that Eels is dead. Darkrai, if we don't get Energy Switch, isn't dead. That would be ridiculous. But what I will tell you is that it's not going to be anywhere near as effective as it has been with Energy Switch. The Gothitelle Exalgor deck will be dead unless, of course, we get that reprint of Gothitelle. So it will shake the format up quite a bit. It's not going to do anything really to Plasma. But again, we're going to talk about all this in great detail. I just wanted to tell you right at the beginning that we are going to be getting a rotation. It is going to be Next Destinies On. And also Black and White Kling Clang is going to really nerf the Kling Clang deck. You'll still have the Plasma Clang, but you won't have the moving energy max potioning that you've been accustomed to. So, just to let you know, that is happening. Again, next week we'll look at that in a lot more detail. What's very, very interesting, and I don't have a huge amount of information about this at the moment, but there is going to be a new Black and White On format. That's the format we've currently got, plus any extra cards that are released in the interim, coming at the end of 2014. Now, that's the end of next year. We can probably assume that's after Worlds 2014, after the next Worlds, not including this one coming. So I wouldn't worry about it too much now. Whether it will be tournaments are going to be run in either modified or this Black and White On, or whether there's going to be at every tournament two tournaments running, maybe concurrently, maybe sequentially, one modified, one Black and White On, I honestly couldn't tell you. We don't have that information yet. What I would say is your good Black and White On cards, things like your Black and White Kling Clang, and your Energy Switch, your Crushing Hammer, etc., 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 I would keep hold of them, because you never know when they're going to be needed. What I would also say is, we never know what's going to be released in future sets. So I wouldn't just keep hold of the Black and White cards that have been good in decks. I mean, the example I'll give you is Celebi Prime last year. Celebi was terrible. Triumphant, the Heart Gold Soul Silver set came out, and there were primes like Gengar Prime and Magnezone Prime, and there were some amazing primes in that set. It was ridiculous. Then there were things like Absol, which saw a bit of play, and then Electrode saw a bit of play, and Celebi became the only prime in that set that was balls, and no one liked it, and it was terrible. And then we got Mewtwo, and we got well, most importantly, we got Sky Arrow Bridge. And all of a sudden, CMT was born, and Celebi became, in my eyes, one of the very best primes that was released in the Heart Gold Soul Silver sets. And I mean that very sincerely. And not just because he helped me grind into Worlds, but because it gave energy acceleration, and it was amazing, and I loved him. For a time, that Celebi was like $2 or something ridiculous. So, just to let you know. So, that's the rotation. We'll talk about it more next week. What we're going to be talking about this week is US Nationals. Now, US Nationals was a crazy big tournament. It had over 900 players. It had 9 rounds in 2 different pods, which for those of you not in the US, basically it was run as 2 separate tournaments, both with 9 rounds. And you were only there with a particular set of... you were only there with a particular kind of set of people. So if you were in the yellow pod, you couldn't play anyone from the blue pod. And if you were in the blue pod, you couldn't play anyone from the yellow pod. And then, of course, when it got to the top cut, the pods started being all mixed together. So very, very big tournament and a huge variety of decks. Now, I'm not going to be looking too much individually. What I'm going to look at is the top cut. Now, because of the information that we have, in terms of completed listings, I'm going to be looking at top 32 on. Partly because looking at top 128 on would kill me, and partly because we haven't had confirmation of all the decks. So, going through, in terms of the most popular decks in top 32, the most popular deck in top 32, of course, was Plasma. It was represented 13 times in the top 32, which is obviously quite crazy. It didn't actually win the whole tournament. It came second. But 13 spots in the top 32, that's 40%, or 41% actually, because I should probably round up. 41% of the entire top cut was plasmaless. And there was a variety of these. Some of them were Plasma with Lugia. Some of them were pretty much just Kyurem with Caldeo and Experience Share. Some of them were Plasma with Life Dew. There were lots of different things there. The second most popular deck was actually Gothitelle. And there were 7 slots in the top 32, which represented about 22%. Gothitelle, I always maintained, wasn't the best deck. It could be donked, it could be rushed, and quite frankly, it had problems. You know, if you could miss that lock, you could miss the DCE or the Exalgar on a particular turn, you could whiff the lock, and that gives your opponent a chance to get back into the game. What I think allowed Exalgar to do, or Exalgar Gothitelle I should say, what allowed it to do so well was the fact that a lot of people just thought, nah, not doing it, not even going to try. Plasma players weren't playing Caldeo, they were hoping they were going to be able to rush it. Now, a very well-known player, Karl Sukovic, of the top cut, he made it all the way through to top 16. He, I believe, in top cut, beat 2 Gothitelles out of 2. He eventually lost in a Plasma Mirror match. He beat 2 Gothitelles in best of 3. He was just faster. Now, a lot of the Plasma lists that were doing well seemed to be just going by pure consistency, and that will allow them to beat Gothitelle. Now, what I will say about Gothitelle is the ones that made it into the top cut generally seemed to be very, very good in top cut. They weren't making it in the top cut and then dropping like flies. They were doing really quite well. There were 2 of them in the top 4, and Gothitelle actually managed to win the entire tournament, beating out Plasma in the final. The third most popular deck in top 32 was Blastoise. It had 5 representations in the top 32, which is about 16% of the top cut. Now, although it was the third most popular deck in top 32, there wasn't a single Blastoise that got beyond top 16. Which is very, very strange, with Gothitelle being the second most popular deck, and Blastoise having what in theory should be a good matchup against it. It should be winning. Now, I know what a lot of Gothitelle players were doing was adding in more catchers. 2 catchers for a while was the standard, and then I've seen people putting 3 or 4 catchers in Gothitelle. Now, Blastoise in theory has a popular matchup, a favourable matchup against Gothitelle. You get the Blastoise up, and you get 4 energy on a Caldeo, and you get 2 Caldeo out, and you're doing quite nicely, because you are going to be able to just rush in with your non-poison Caldeo, then rush in again, and then knock out the Gothitelle. Just as long as you get a Blastoise out, and you get 4 energy on a Caldeo, and you get a second Caldeo out. But if your opponent goes first and gets a turn 2 Trainer Lock, how are you getting out 2 Caldeos, one of which has 4 energy, and of course your Blastoise? Very, very difficult. Blastoise also struggled immensely against Kling-Klang, which wasn't wonderfully represented, but it was still there. And it struggled against Garbodor, which, again, was still there. And it struggled against Plasma, just purely because Plasma was very consistent, very fast, and it rushed them out of it. Let's not forget, of course, that Squirtles have 60 HP. In a deck like Blastoise, you're generally running about 10 basics, maybe, at the most. So when you start Squirtle, you're likely to be starting Lone Squirtle. And quite frankly, there were a lot of Donk Squirtles running around. Gothitelle also ran a lot of low HP basics. The difference is Gothitelle generally was running 13, 14 basics, and was much less likely to get donked. Coming after Blastoise's 5 top 32 finishes, we have 4 top 32 finishes for Darkrai, which isn't a terrible... It's not a terrible run out for Darkrai, but it's not great. We're talking 1 in 8 decks, so we're talking about 12.5%. It's not brilliant, but it's a decent representation. I mean, Darkrai was always onto a bit of a loser. Plasma, the matchup isn't easy, although you can add a couple enhanced hammers to try and make it easier. Similarly, you have a very hard time against Kling-Klang, you have a very hard time against Blastoise, and Gothlock for Darkrai, as I've said before, comes down to a very similar thing to Gothlock against Blastoise, which is, sure, if you put in 2 Caldeo and you get both Caldeo down at the same time whilst having a Darkrai attacking, and a Dark Energy on one of the Caldeo without using items after the Trainer Lock gets put on, then yes, by all means, you've got a very, very good chance to win that game. But if they get the turn 2 lock, especially if they go first, how are you going to get a Darkrai with 3 energy and 2 Caldeo, one of which has an energy on? Bearing in mind, if you put down 1 Caldeo early, that's going to be captured, and then they're going to start locking that one. And as soon as 1 Caldeo dies, the other one gets captured up and dies as well. So yes, you can put 2 Caldeo in there, but you need to play it right and get lucky and draw the right things at the right time, although one could argue that's the same as get lucky. Winnable, yes, but certainly not, and that's what I think really hampered Darkrai here. I saw one post on the internet saying Darkrai was too consistent. That's complete rubbish. It's a stupid statement to make. What I would say is, though, it's got a lot of problems. It's got a lot of bad matchups. Kling-Klang, some Garbodor variants, especially if they focus heavily on Landorus, Blastoise, and Gothitelle if you don't play it correctly. So I still would rather play Darkrai. If I'm playing Darkrai against Plasma, I want to be the Darkrai player. But that's about it, to be honest. And then rounding out, we had 2 other decks in the top 32. We had a Kling-Klang, made top 32. Oh, sorry, just to finish that last bit off, Darkrai managed to top 8, but it didn't manage any higher than top 8, which would surprise some people. And then rounding it out, we had 2 Garbodors in the top 32, neither of which made it past top 16. And we had 1 Kling-Klang in top 32, which made it all the way to a top 8 finish. Kling-Klang has a good matchup against Blastoise, it has a good matchup against Plasma, and it has a good matchup against Darkrai. Kling-Klang is very, very well placed to do really well in this format, with the exception of one thing: Gothitelle. Plasma has no Kling-Klang has no real answer to Gothitelle, because they're just going to be capturing you, and you're a slower deck, you're giving them time to put the lock on, but also you're never going to get that one hit. I mean, Kling-Klang, if you can get the Shift Gear Kling-Klang with free energy, and you can hit double heads, that's your only way to knock out a Gothitelle. Cobalion Noble Victories does 80, Cobalion EX does 100, the Plasma Clang I think does 70, so you're never actually going to be doing anything there. Add to that the extra hardship of the fact that a lot of your Pokemon have very high retreat costs, and you're in a lot of trouble there, because they can catch you up and you can't switch out of it. So, quite frankly, Kling Klang has almost no Goth matchup whatsoever. I don't know for a fact, I can't remember, but I believe it probably lost to Gothitelle. And that's the problem. When you've got the most represented deck, the second most represented deck in Top Cup being Gothitelle, which is, especially in best of 3, pretty much an auto loss, there's basically nothing you can do there. So, that was the top 32. Congratulations to, I believe, Edmund Couras, who won with Gothitelle, and to the gentleman who got second with Plasma. And to everyone, quite frankly, who did well. Now, there was one podcast listener who did very well, Mr. Alex here. We'll get to him at the end. What I want to look at is 5 less usual decks that's made it to the top 128. Now, there were 2 Rails in top 128. I don't want to go into Rails too much. I've been into them before. But basically, Rails, I said it was a good deck to have a go with, and I maintain that. It can have a decent Gothitelle matchup if you play Raikou, because you can snipe the Exalgor with Raikou, and then they're going to miss their deck and cover. But again, it's very, very difficult to get it all working out properly, and, again, Caldeo can help you unless they catch or unlock the Caldeo. And with Rails, with attackers and eels, you're not going to have space on the bench for 2 Caldeo, even if you can afford to fit them into your deck. To be honest, I would imagine Rails got killed by the faster decks like Plasma and Darkrai. It's a shame. If you put a Victini in, you beat Kling Klang. It's got a brilliant Blastoise matchup, and it can beat Gothitelle, but there's just too many other things going against it, it seems, for US Nationals. There was also a Ho-Oh deck in top 64, and again, Ho-Oh, it's got a bad Blastoise matchup. It doesn't have a great Plasma matchup due to the Ho-Oh. And of course you can just, I believe it was run with Cobalion EX, so you can just run with a Cobalion EX, but you're still not doing quite enough damage there. I've not found Cobalion EX to be a brilliant counter for Plasma, but I know it can help quite a bit. As someone who played a Ho-Oh deck for quite a bit of this past season, I love the man that made top 64 with Ho-Oh. Not as much as Jake Wolvin loves him, because we all know Jake Wolvin's Ho-Oh was pretty much unbeatable. That's why he's going to Worlds this year. But, yeah, good luck, good on him, quite frankly. But there were 3 weirder decks. So we're going to start off with Garchomp Altaria. Now this is an old deck which hasn't seen play in quite some time. This was very, very hyped coming out of Japan, and it seems it should have had a very good matchup against Hydreigon, but for some reason it never really did. I believe it was Komatsuda. He won a Battle Carnival with us in Japan last year, booked his trip to Worlds, and we all thought it was going to be amazing, and it really wasn't. Now, there's several reasons why this shouldn't do well nowadays. First of all, you're running 4 40 HP Pokemon with a lightning weakness. Thunderous says hello. Secondly, you're running a lot of low HP Pokemon. Thirdly, your 140 HP Garchomp is no longer safe from things like just a Kyurem in Plasma, because Kyurem with 2 Deoxys or with a Laser Verbank or with just a Laser and 1 Deoxys is going to be one-hitting you. And it's a Stage 2 deck, so it takes a little bit of setup and it's a little bit slower, etc. Now, in theory, it's got a brilliant Kling Klang matchup. In theory, it does all right against Blastoise, although their Caldeos can be a bit of a pain for you if they get 4 or 5 energy on. But it can win. The problem here really is against Plasma, and I don't suppose it's got much of a Goth matchup as well. And again, even if you think about Plasma, Garchomp does 60 damage, 80 with 1 Altaria out, 100 with 2 Altaria out, etc. And discards a special energy. So if you can get your Garchomp going on turn 2, you can be hitting for 80, 100, 120. In theory, if you get the full 4 Altarias out, you could be hitting for 140 damage and discarding a special energy. Now, there are 2 things that you need to know about Garchomp Altaria and how it made top 64. First of all, it was piloted by Ross Cawthorn, he who's got second at Worlds twice, he who is clearly one of the best players in the world. That would have had a lot to do with it. Secondly, Ross Cawthorn won a Regionals this past year, or came second. He got 2 buys from Regionals. What that means is, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, his 2 buys meant he would cut if he made 6-3. And of course he finished only 6-3. I say only 6-3, it's US Nationals. He finished 6-3. He got in with good resistance because of his buys, made it through top 128 and lost in top 64. Shouldn't be too surprising, but I love Garchomp Altaria. I like to think it'll be good next season, but it probably won't. Keep an eye out, Garchomp Altaria still runs around a little bit. And there were 2 very strange decks that made top 128. Now, unfortunately, they only made top 128. These were rogue decks, the only 2 really good rogue decks I could see. One was Sableye Garbodor. Garbodor locks abilities, which improves your matchup against Plasma, shutting off Deoxys, against Blastoise, shutting off Blastoise, Klinklang, shutting off Klinklang. In theory, Gothitelle, but they'll probably have the tool scrapper to get rid of it, and then you're screwed. But what it also does is he's got Sableye. Sableye has lasers and hammers. And generally what you do is you hammer off their energy with Crushing Hammer and Enhanced Hammer, you poison them, and you let them die very, very slowly. It also puts Eviolite onto your Sableye, and if you think about the kind of Pokemon hitting for 1 energy, you've got Kyurem, who does, 30, but if you shut off their Deoxys and put an Eviolite on, it's doing 10. Landorus, with an Eviolite, is doing 10. I mean, you could say that you've got your Tornadus EX, which with a Stadium and a DCE is actually going to be doing 40, which will 2-hit a Sableye. But then that DCE is going away due to Enhanced Hammer. And that was basically what the deck was. A very, very inventive deck. A wonderfully inventive deck, quite frankly. Made by a very, very inventive man. Sableye Garbodor, I love the idea. I mean, you could see it's a deck that had kind of too many problems to really go too deep into the tournament. Lots of donking, can be rushed. And of course, if they kind of whiff the hammers, as in they don't draw them, or they hit tails on Crushing Hammer, you can build up enough energy to really just start running through the deck completely. Still, I think it's an absolutely fantastic kind of deck. And it was Andrew Wambolt who made that particular deck. So congratulations, Andrew. I'm proud of you if no one else is. But of course, everyone is. Now, the last deck I want to talk about was another deck that made top 128. And to be honest, I hadn't heard about this until I was looking through the list of winning decks. And tucked away there in top 128, there was a Lugia Cofagrigus deck. Now, Cofagrigus, I'm imagining, is the one where you can place 3 damage counters and KO your own Pokemon. And Lugia, for 4 energy, as long as it's got a Plasma, does 120 and takes an extra prize. So I'm imagining the point here is your Cofagrigus puts 30 on, and then Lugia, with Deoxys, assuming they play Deoxys, of course, will do the extra 150 or 140 to get the KO. Or maybe you do double Cofagrigus, and then you do the 120. Or maybe he plays Laser as well. Laser turn 1, and then on turn 2, Cofagrigus, and knock him out with Lugia. You're getting 3 prizes off an EX. If you're taking 3 prizes off an EX, them getting a prize doesn't really matter. The other thing you can, of course, do with Cofagrigus is play around with N. Oh, they've got 3 prizes left. I'm going to use 2 Cofagrigus, and I'm going to give them 2 prizes, and I'm going to end them to 1. Because obviously, you're using the Cofagrigus during your turn, so you'd cut down what they're getting from N. Didn't get any further than top 128, which makes me a little bit sad. I mean, it looks a little bit gimmicky. You can easily see there that anything that can handle Lugia, plays too much energy removal, is going to run through that deck very, very quickly. I haven't seen the build. All I know is it's Lugia Cofagrigus. But the way I'm imagining it, anything with, that playing a lot of lightning Pokemon or playing a lot of energy removal, Enhanced Hammer, Cobalion EX, etc. is going to keep Lugia in check. But I love that a deck that inventive, that I genuinely hadn't heard about before, was able to get all the way into top 128. Now, the last slightly unusual deck I want to talk about is a deck which Jason Klaczynski piloted, unfortunately I believe finishing 5-4, or at least missing cut, was a Garbodor Darkrai deck, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. Garbodor shuts off abilities, and Darkrai, well, Darkrai is Darkrai. He's got energy acceleration, he hits for 90-30 and all that. Presumably played with an Absol or 2 as well. From what I've read, this deck's a little bit too slow and suffers from time issues, and it can be hard to get everything rolling in one game. But I still love people who roll with unusual decks. If you want to know about some other named players, I know Michael Pramwat missed cut, but I couldn't find out what deck he was playing. Jay Hornung made it to top 128 playing Darkrai, And Kyle Pukasukovic, he from the Top Cup, made it all the way to top 16 with Plasma, before then qualifying for Worlds through the last chance for point tournament by making top 16 in that with, again, Plasma. I can also tell you that Michael Pramwat made it into Worlds through that very same tournament. I don't have much information about the last chance for points, but it was speed decks that were winning it. I heard of some people playing Blastoise, etc., and they just weren't going far enough. So, that's that. We're going to finish this up slightly earlier than usual, hopefully, but there's just a few more things I want to talk about in terms of issues that came up during US Nationals this year. Now, one of them is the importance of buys. Now, in the UK, this is something we don't have. It's not possible to earn a buy from the National Championships. You can get a buy. I mean, my good friend Tommy Roberts got a round 1 buy last year randomly, and that's, I mean, it made me hate him even more than I already do. Not really, Tommy, I love you. But, you know, a buy is very good for reasons I'll explain in a minute. But in the US, if you win a regionals, and I believe if you come second at a regionals, you get 2 buys at the National Championship, meaning you only have to play 7 rounds. I believe in Finland and other countries, the people with the most championship points get 1 or 2 buys. But generally, not a huge amount of countries actually do the buy. The UK doesn't do the buys, and that's fairly, I don't know. Depends who you are, really. If you get the buys, it's good. Now, the reason why a buy is good, if you get a buy, then that basically means that you get a win from somebody, and it's as if you beat someone who has 100% resistance. Now, we all know, you should know, if not, let me explain. When it comes down to people with even records, what they do is they look at your opponent's win percentage, i.e., they look at the combined win percentage of all of your opponents, the total amount of matches that all of your opponents played, and you take the total amount of wins your opponents had, and you work it out as a percentage. So, and then the people with the highest win percentage get through. The theory being, of course, that the better their win percentage, the harder your opponents were, and the harder opponents you played, the more deserving you are to go into Top Cut. Someone who finishes 6-3 beating good people is more deserving of a place in Top Cut than people who go 6-3 beating terrible players, which makes sense, quite frankly. So if you've got 2 buys of 100% resistance, you are going to cut. And from what I saw, I believe everyone that went 6-3 with 1 buy managed to cut. Because it really does. I mean, if you say, you know, if you're lucky, your opponent might go 6-3, and that's going to mean they've got something like 66% resistance. 100% resistance will bring your average up. So if you can go in with buys, it's a huge, huge advantage. The regionals, I mean, yeah, winning from regionals, you know, and getting those 2 buys helps in terms of making Top Cut because you've got 2 wins before you get started. But what it does is it basically means if you've got buys, going 6-3 will cut. A lot of people went 6-3 at US Nationals. The vast majority of them didn't make Top Cut. Now, one person who did make Top Cut with 6-3, but not because of bias, because of good resistance, was a lovely man called Alex Hill. Tweets me all the time. He was tweeting me actually during Nationals. And he sent me a lovely email. I won't read it to you in full. But what he said was he was testing Landorus, Cravali and Garbodor. And it started working up until the day of Nats when he started losing every game to every deck that wasn't Darkrai. So he switched over to Plasma and even managed to fit a Max Potion in, which he says was his least useful card at a tournament, and if he could, he would have changed it for an Enhanced Hammer for the Mirror. He said his list was standard, except he played the Team Plasma EX, and he played 2 Getsis. Running you through his tournament quickly, he beat Kling Klang round 1, just through pure speed. Round 2, he played Juniper, and managed to get his Plasma Tornadus EX running very, very quickly. Round 3, he rushed a Blastoise for the win. Round 4, he played Gothitelle, and his opponent drew too many cards off and N at one point, etc. But the point is he ended up winning against Gothitelle, mostly just by rushing him and his opponent whiffing what he needed. Round 5, he was benched by Lugia EX in 3 turns. Yowza. Round 6, he lost to Gothitelle because Plasma loses to Gothitelle when it sets up. Round 7, he drew dead against Plasma and finished the day 4-3. Round 8, he was paired down, but his opponent didn't turn up. And round 9, he went up against Plasma and just ran hot, quite frankly. So top 128, he played against Plasma with a Lugia focus, playing 2 Lugia and 3 Frozen City, which helps against Blastoise and Darkrai, but obviously that's going to cost him in the mirror, and it did. Top 64, he played against Gothitelle, and unfortunately, it's Gothitelle. It's a bad matchup. But congratulations to Alex Hill for making it all the way to top 64. Now, there's a lovely man who emailed me from his website, Poker Scoop, I believe it's called. Poker Press, I do apologise, Poker Press. And firstly, my apologies to Stephen Reich, who has emailed me a couple of times. I haven't been meaning to ignore you, and I apologise wholeheartedly if you believe I've done so. Well, I have. I haven't replied to your emails. I can apologise for that. Got a very interesting interview with a junior player that I will try and link to on my YouTube channel. But basically, he's got an interview with the Nationals junior champion. I will try and get that for next week. What I'm also working on is an interview with Karl Sukovic, a proper interview with good sound quality. I'll let you know how that's going. The last thing I need to mention about US Nationals, and then we'll bring this show to a close, is Plasma Dew. Not Plasma Dew. Let's call it Plasma Dew. Life Dew in Plasma. And what this is the A-Spec tool, which says that when the Pokemon it's attached to gets knocked out, you take 1 less prize. Very nice indeed. Now, it's not perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination. When I told you about this card, one of the things I said was, and I've said this with every A-Spec tool, you are pushing your luck a little bit, playing an A-Spec tool. Because the problem with playing an A-Spec tool is your opponent plays a tool scrapper, and all of a sudden, you've wasted your A-Spec. However, in my Nationals list, I played EXP Share. And the reason I played EXP Share was, firstly, not a lot of people were playing tool scrapper, and secondly, those that were struggled to get it out at the right time. So actually, it worked. Now, one thing that's important to note about Life Dew, unlike something like EXP Share, it reads, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out. Doesn't matter how it's knocked out, it's not just some damage, it's any knockout whatsoever. So you can't just kill it with laser to try and get around it. What you have to do is Tool Scrapper or Catcher around it. But of course, you attach this to a Kyurem with free energy on, your opponent catches and kills something else. Now, you haven't taken down the Kyurem, and you've reset the Blizzard Burn, so they're hitting for at least 120, probably more with lasers and Deoxys out. So, and it seemed to be, there were several Plasmalists playing this, and several of them seemed to go very deep in the tournament. It was kind of the card du jour of the, or card du weekend, if you want to be pedantic about it, of the Nationals tournament. So, yeah, I can see how it worked. I don't know how well it will work going forward, because the problem you've got is the cat's out the bag. At Nationals, the people only ever really play Tool Scrapper for Garbodor. I mean, when your Klinklangs and your Klinklangs and Blastoise are starting to cut Tool Scrapper, then, you know, not a lot of other decks are going to be playing it. Certainly Plasma wasn't, and most Darkrai's weren't. So actually, you literally have forced them into a 7-prize game, heck, maybe even an 8-prize game, if you make them, you know, the old 7-prize game of, you know, make them kill 2 EXs and a non-EX, and then make sure they got to kill another EX, 7 prizes, but then say, you know, you make them kill a second non-EX with Life Dew on, that's effectively an 8-prize game. And when you consider how many games come down to, oh, I had the win next turn, or, oh, it's 1 prize off winning, and then all of a sudden you get your opponent to take 1 less prize, give yourself 1 more turn, you can see how this gets you the win very nicely here. The problem is now the cat's out of the bag, more people will probably be taking Tool Scrapper, so, I don't know, it may be worth a play, but Computer Search is so good early game, and Dow's Machine is so good late game, and Scramble Switch sets up so many game-winning plays. Life Dew is a risk. Then again, it's that weird thing of people are playing Life Dew, so everyone thinks, right, let's play Tool Scrapper, that'll get rid of their Life Dew. And then everyone starts thinking, well, hang on a second, if everyone's going to play Tool Scrapper to get rid of Life Dew, there's no point playing Tool Scrapper. So then no one ends up playing Tool Scrapper, because everyone thinks, well, I'm not playing Life Dew because of Tool Scrapper. And then everyone thinks, well, I'm not playing Tool Scrapper because no one's playing Life Dew, and then all of a sudden, because no one's playing Tool Scrapper, Life Dew comes in again. I hope that made some semblance of sense. The point I'm making is, it might be worth a punt, but it is a gamble. Now, one last thing, I know I said that before, but I mean it this time. One last thing I'll say about Nationals. It was won by Gothitelle. Does that mean Gothitelle is a deck to beat for Worlds? Well, I've got my World show coming up in a couple of weeks, so I'll keep it brief. What I would say about it is this. It's an amazing deck. It's got problems. It's always had problems. It will continue to have problems. A lot of people are saying that Blastoise is going to be seeing less play for Worlds. It will still be there. It can still win. Darkrai is apparently going to see less play. Double Caldeo, it can win. Now, I saw an interesting thing on... And that's not to mention the fact that it can be rushed, it can be donked, or you can just miss a couple of decking covers and lose. But the other thing to bear in mind is this. I saw a post on the internet. Somebody basically said, well, last year Kling Klang was, and Kling Klang was easy. Because all you had to do was stick a couple of Lost Removers in your deck, get rid of a couple Special Energy, and you're going to win the matchup. You can't do that against Gothitelle. Yeah, you can. Audino. Don't just put Double Caldeo into any deck, because unless it's Blastoise or Darkrai, you ain't going to be able to get it out the active or attack with it. There's no point. To Audino. This is the Audino that's got the ability where you drop it down and it removes 10 damage. It only removes one special condition, so it's paralysis or poison. Hint, announce very clearly you're getting rid of paralysis. Some players at Worlds aren't very nice, as I learned last year and reminded you about in last week's podcast. You play 2 Audino. That's good. Say you're running a Plasma list. You run 2 Audino. You build up some Kyurem on the bench. You've got 2 Audino. That's going to give you 2 turns attacking with Kyurem. That's going to KO 2 Gothitelles. That could well win you the game. All I would say is, cards are coming out for those 2 Audinos, so is that going to make your mirror match weaker, etc.? I don't know. That's something for you to figure out. What I will tell you is, Gothitelle is beatable, and there is an easy tech against it. Yeah, you can start with Audino and that'll suck, and yeah, it weakens your matchup, blah blah blah. That's the way the game has always been and will always be. If you want to improve your matchup against one deck, you're going to have to change your deck a little bit, and that's likely to weaken your matchup against other decks. What I would tell you is, if you're worried about Gothitelle, stick 2 Audino into whatever deck you're going to do, and as long as you can one-hit Gothitelle, you'll be golden. If you can't one-hit Gothitelle, doesn't matter how many Audino you put in, because... oh, I'm playing an Audino and I'm hitting your Gothitelle for 80, and then you're just going to switch to a different Gothitelle, and then I've wasted my time. But if you can one-hit a Gothitelle, a couple Audino might win you the match. I'm not guaranteeing anything, because you're going to have to get all of this done without trainers. You're going to have to try and find those Audinos without trainers, but I'm telling you it can be done. So, that's US Nationals, and 40 minutes in, I think it's about time to call it a day. Next week, I'll be talking all about the rotation, and I'm going to talk about a lot of issues in terms of decks getting weaker, decks getting killed, cards we're missing, etc. But that'll be next week. My YouTube channel is now fully up and running. Just go onto YouTube and search PTCG Radio. You know what we're called by now. I have managed to hit 100 subscribers in a week, but considering there's, at least a couple of thousand on Pokemon Dan and the Top Cut, I know there's fans out there, and I've got 336 followers on Twitter or something, and I know there's about 400 people who listen to this a week. Ergo, I should have at least 300 to 400 subscribers on YouTube, if you all love me like I hope you do. So, please, if you're listening to this, just pop online in a minute, go over to YouTube, and just find PTCG Radio, and subscribe. I'm up to 103 subscribers, apparently. I always want more. Please go on and subscribe. I want to know you care. Now, I've popped a load of I haven't popped a load. I popped a few PTCGO videos up there. There are 6 of them up there now, and I've got a couple other little ones I can hopefully pop up on there tonight, and I'm going to keep recording and keep popping them on. And as long as people watch them, I'll keep recording them, and I'll keep putting them up online. There's some cracking games up there. There's a really good Rails Darkrai Hammers game. In fact, there's 2 that I played. There's a really good Quad Snorlax against Blastoise game. So, do go on and check those out. In the near future, I will hopefully be going back down to Cornwall, that's my plan, and I will hopefully be recording the first episode of the documentary in which I teach my little brother how to play Pokemon. I'm going to roll with that. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on Twitter at the Wassy. You can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or you can go onto my YouTube channel and leave me any kind of comment there. You might be listening to this on YouTube. If so, hello. Hope you subscribed. Just leave a comment below. I get back to people. I like to think I get back to people. So, thank you very much for listening as always. If you've got any suggestions of decks you want to see me playing on PTCGO, you know how to get hold of me. Thanks for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.